welcome back, everyone. Um, Today, we're going to talk about the television series Warrior. For those who don't know, Warrior is based on the writings by none other than Bruce Lee. Originally, the show was going to be called Assam, and apparently, Assam was going to be blind. Side note, Bruce Lee was fascinated by samurai movies, specifically Za Toi Chi, who was a blind samurai. Bruce tried to pitch the show to Warner Brothers and Paramount, but was quickly turned down. Now, many people thought Bruce's ideas were stolen by Warner Brothers. Not true, because later Warner Brothers produced the hit TV show Kung Fu, starring David Carradine. So, according to Fred Weintraub, the producer of Enter the Dragon, one of my favorite movies, and the author of Bruce Lee Alive, Matthew Polly, that Warner Brothers and the creator of Kung Fu, Ed Spillman, was already in development of the show before Bruce pitched Warrior to Warner Brothers. However, Bruce did in fact try out for the role for Kwai Chang Caine, who's the lead character of Kung Fu, but obviously was turned down because of Bruce's ethnicity and unfortunately his accent. I don't understand if you wanted a Chinese character to be played in a show, you should hire a Chinese actor. Anyway, a little bit of the show's premise set during the Tong Wars in the late 1870s, San Francisco. The series follows Sahm, martial artist prodigy who immigrates to China from China, who is in search of his sister, but apparently, when he gets there, he is sold to the most powerful tongs in Chinatown. Great story so far. So today's co-host is Brandon Arroyo. He is one of my training partners in Jeet Kune Do, and he also helps out at the Fist of Interception Institute, where I teach. Hello, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hi.
Great.
Hi, and how are things?
Great. All right. So, Warrior Season 1. For anybody who has tuned into this episode, this is more or less of a review of what we think of Season 1. My plan is to have more episodes of Season 2. I'm going to have them with Brandon, but I felt that Season 1 should be one good, compact review. And when we do other episodes, we could do episode 1 of Season 2 and then episode 2 of Season 2, so on and so forth. That's my plan. So we could have a lot of episodes and we could talk about what's going on within Season 2 because of the fact that Season 3 for Warrior has been picked up. So in celebration of that, we're going to talk about Warrior, and we'll talk about until Season 3 comes in, and then we could talk about more Warrior when Season 3 episodes come out. So That's good for us, right? All right. So, Warrior. Let's talk about the characters, Brandon. I'll talk about the character Assam, which is played by Andrew Koji. Now, I read before he got the part for Assam that he was actually going to quit, which was very interesting.
Really?
Apparently, he did not have any roles to play because he went for a role that he wanted to do. He wasn't cut out for it. So, in Andrew Koji's case, he felt that he was just going to quit altogether until he tried out for the role for Assam for Warrior, and apparently he got it. What I also looked into Andrew Koji's martial arts history is that he used to compete in Taekwondo. And for the Warrior, he also trained in Wing Chun, which I unfortunately did not get to who he trained with, but that's how he portrayed his martial arts abilities in the series. During the series, I felt that his acting ability was very solid. And a lot of people don't realize that he actually has some sort of a British accent. He's not
Mhm.
really American, right? Which is actually
Yeah.
good because he played a person who is Chinese and also who has an American accent very well.
Mhm.
So that's how much good of an actor Andrew Koji is. Uh, Also, the way that he carried himself in the series, he wasn't that type of lead character. Like, hey, here I am, I'm the lead character. He was more very cool. He was more laid back. But then I felt that his action spoke louder than the words that he was speaking,
Mhm.
because it's the way that he carried himself as the character of Assam. I believe Assam was a martial arts prodigy coming from China and stirring up trouble in the San Francisco streets, fighting everybody,
Yeah.
especially your favorite
Mhm.
actor, Joe Taslim, his character,
Lee Young.
Lee Young, right?
Mhm.
So tell me about Lee Young, the Joe Taslim.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that my first experience with Joe Taslim was with the Raid Redemption.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and then just that whole sort of visceral experience of watching that film as a martial artist
Right.
and feeling like, okay, well, this is really brutal. But then seeing Joe Taslim in that fight sequence with who I believe was Mad Dog at the time, and just the flexibility and agility and all this other stuff
Right.
really got me and brought me into being a fan of Joe Taslim. And then I saw him in like a Fast and Furious movie, which, unfortunately they brought him down to scale because it's Fast and Furious and Vin Diesel's Vin Diesel. And it's just like,
Wait, so he
everything's
was
about
in
him. And
Fast and Furious? He was in Fast and Furious?
yeah, he was in Fast and Furious. It was
Oh,
him and
interesting.
someone else, and they had a fight sequence with Ludacris
Oh.
Tyrese Gibson.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just kind of like this sort of like, oh no moment for them. But I think everybody now outside of Warrior knows Joe Taslim as Sub-Zero.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yep.
He is now the definitive version of Sub-Zero, and I think the one that most people were super excited to see.
Yeah.
I mean, the kind of the reason why they were sort of brought to see Mortal Kombat. I mean, outside of the franchise itself, right?
Right.
So Joe Taslim having experience in sort of wushu and taekwondo and judo, and then bringing him into the Warrior series was, I think, a smart decision,
Yeah,
a really smart decision, because the dude
it's fast. I believe that
is fast.
one of the actors who played uh, Jax, I believe in Mortal
Yeah,
Kombat,
yeah,
said
yeah.
that there are two people in the world that was told to slow down because they were fast. One of them was Bruce
Mm-hmm.
Lee, and the second was Joe Taslim. Can you believe
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah,
I've
I
seen this
can.
guy, and he is fast. He's really good. He's very
He is.
agile. He's very precise.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he's going to become one of the biggest action stars that
Yeah,
we'll ever see in our generation, right?
yeah, and he's really good at selling the performance art
Oh, yeah.
of the martial arts aspect. And I saw an interview with him where he was discussing, how he gets into it, and he was explaining that he's broken ribs and he's broken bones, and like he knows what that feels like. So when he has to portray it on screen, he knows exactly what that feeling is. So he
Yeah.
knows how to portray it and how to sell it to the audience.
Right.
So having him play Lee Young in Warrior was super interesting to me, because he takes his character is relatively quiet. He's a quiet guy, and I think in Hollywood that's very much the stereotype for the Asian character in films. It's just like the Asian character is either the weird one, the quiet one, or the one in the back corner not saying a single thing, or you know, uh, sort of joining in the politics of it all, right?
Right.
So you take Joe Taslim, who's this quiet character, but as soon as you see him, you know that his silence is backed up by his ability to fight.
Right.
Like his introduction is so strong that it just sets you up for whatever he's going to do
Right.
entirely.
That's why I feel that Andrew Koji and Joe Taslim, I feel that their action ability
Mm-hmm.
speaks louder than whatever they're doing.
Yep.
Even though that Warrior is a martial arts based type of action, right?
Hmm.
But their ability to fight and just no words spoken, and especially
Hmm.
when they're whenever they're acting, right? Like I've seen Andrew Koji, just it's very subtle,
Hmm.
not more of like explaining or having this big dialogue of talk, right? It
Hmm.
was just more straight to the point, simple and direct, right?
Yep.
The way Bruce's Jeet Kune Do is very simple, direct, and that's what I feel that when Bruce Lee wrote the story is to have some sort of simplicity. Bruce was in an interview and he mentioned that a motion picture should be just motion, not so much talk, just motion. And I felt
Hmm.
that maybe he translated that into his story for the Warrior. And obviously,
Hmm.
whatever story that we are seeing now, I'm sure that he didn't write that, but the writers based this story that we're watching was from Bruce's writings. I'm pretty
Hmm.
sure they wrote something here, changed a little bit here. Uh, because if Assam was supposed to be blind in the earlier writings of Bruce's writings, then it could make sense. But having a blind Chinese character, I'm not sure it would fit well at during that time. But if they filmed it now, shoot, I'll watch the hell out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Hmm.
Especially during the time where there was not any Chinese lead actors or Spanish lead
Hmm.
actors, or majority of Hollywood was, uh, Caucasian. Why they wouldn't want to have these other ethnicities be bankable for movie production? They really missed out on a lot of great opportunities for making movies, for making TV,
Of
right?
course they did. Of
If
course they did.
if Bruce actually got the role for Kung Fu, that would have been really different, right?
Hmm.
If Bruce would have had more, I know for sure, if people saw Bruce Lee as Kwai Chang Caine in Kung Fu, they would have had more seasons because there was only 3 seasons of Kung Fu. They probably
Hmm.
would have at least to make it to 5 seasons, 6 seasons. The way that Bruce explodes in the picture
Hmm.
translate to the point where, hey, this guy is special. This guy knows how to fight. And if he's going to bring that very subtle, very, like what you said, in the back, but he's the lead character, his action will speak louder than, his words. Man, that would have been a great series to watch. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, they went with the lather.
Yeah.
So Warrior is produced by Shannon Lee, and everybody knows who Shannon Lee is. She is the daughter of Bruce Lee, and the co-producer of Warrior is Justin Lin, one of the biggest directors and part of the biggest franchise of American cinema, The Fast and Furious. And Brandon, we've discussed this before. Some of the cast of Warrior was in parts of
Hmm.
the Fast and Furious movies. As you
Yep.
mentioned, Joe Taslim and Jason Tobin, who plays Young Jun, was in Fast and Furious 3 Tokyo Drift, which I
Yep.
purposely watched on and off. But I'm
So
pretty
did the
sure
rest of the nation.
so did the rest of the nation. Not saying that Tobin's acting ability was not recognized, but for me, after Fast and Furious 1 and 2, you lost me there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so speaking of Tobin, Young June, he is the son of Father June. Father June is Perry Young, and they are part of a Tong, which is a gangster group called the Hop Wei.
Hmm.
Now, during the 1870s, they had this particular war called the Tong Wars, and they were a series of violent disputes among the Chinese factions or gangster factions. in the Chinatowns of various American cities, specifically in San Francisco. That's why San Francisco is based in the Warrior during that time. And
Hmm.
when Andrew Koji's character Assam arrives to the U.S., automatically he is placed into a tong, Hop Wei, right
Yep.
automatically.
Yep.
Now, how did that happen? Apparently, when he got out of the boat from China to America, apparently he was picked on by three immigration officers.
Hmm.
And just to let everybody know, Warrior is racially driven,
Hmm.
right? Because during that time, there was in the Warrior, it was more of the Irish versus the Chinese. Now they were seeing that the Chinese were taking away all of the American people's jobs at half the price, and the people who were American, who you know that I saw majority of the show was Irishmen, didn't like that. So they were attacking Chinese citizens and violence erupted. So that's in and out of what Warrior is. And every few episodes they always bring up the topic of the Chinese are not supposed to be here. The Chinese look at how they dress, they smell, they bring diseases, and it's that's all throughout the series.
Hmm.
And it's not so different the way it is now.
No, not at
Unfortunately,
all.
there is the anti-Asian violence that's going around at this time. What this series brings the most out of the message is that Chinese are human beings. They came here to have a better opportunity. Some came here without a choice. Some came here to escape China, and then it's just they happen to be here working, but just minding their own business until other ethnicities felt that they were taking jobs away or they felt that they were being a threat.
And if you even if you were to like look at the character of Chow,
Yeah,
right? The black market salesman. There's a particular point within the season where he pulls near the end of the season where he pulls Osama aside, and he lets him know. This is after like the sort of fall of Assam, where he pulls him aside and he's letting him know that he's not a coolie, that like that Chow himself didn't have a choice, that he was
right.
brought in with the slave trade, and that he recognized that he wasn't a slave. And I think a lot of people tend to forget that like the Chinese were also servants and slaves at a particular point in
Mm-hmm.
time. And that's often forgotten in history. I mean, like within the Caribbean islands themselves, you had Asian servants and slaves, sort of for like the higher capitalist
Right.
people who were obviously having the African American slaves working fields, but you had like the Chinese slaves working,
Inside being
um,
servants.
yeah,
Yeah.
inside. And then you think about like the Italian and Irish coming to this melting pot called America, and they're already sort of um, put down and have having prejudices thrown at them. So it's like it's kind of like uh, a drop effect where or like a mirroring effect where that anti-Irish sentiment is
Mm-hmm.
being brought over to the anti-Chinese sentiment. Um, and in a way, it's all a reflection of the disadvantages that were there. So like when you see characters like Leary,
Mm-hmm.
um, who have issues with like characters like Assam or Young June or just like the whole world of Warrior, you start
Mm-hmm.
to recognize that it's very much an American story, but
Yep.
like the Chinese experience in America.
Yeah. So Leary, played by Dean Jagger. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
what a protagonist and antagonist character. Because there are
Yep.
times when you feel like he's right or whatever he's saying, but then he's wrong. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like you kind of want to feel where he's coming from, but then whatever he's doing to the Chinese community and what he's actually also doing to his own countrymen. Remember the time when uh, he had to help Bill
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
when he had to help Bill with his gambling addiction, and he had
Hmm.
to beat up the, I guess, the collector, who was an
Hmm.
Irishman,
Hmm.
and Leary had to beat him up because apparently the collector was working for another Tong called the Feng Hai,
Hmm.
and Leary thought that it was very disrespectful to the Irish community or to his race that he had that this collector had to work for the Chinese, who he hates so much. Whenever like I see this guy fight, I'm always a person who likes action. He's
Hmm.
very brutish. He does the 1-2 type of punch. And especially has there was episodes where he has his own back alley ring where he just fights, and I feel like he's just testing out his abilities, and he's taking out his aggression and his anger on his opponents, which is really interesting. But then,
Yeah,
damn man, I like this guy and I hate this guy at the same time, man.
yeah.
It's
It's a
just
his.
it's really weird. But then he plays the character very well.
Hmm.
Kudos to Dean Jagger for that, right?
Yeah.
And speaking about Bill O'Hara, right,
Hmm.
played by Kieran Boo.
Yep.
Now, very quickly, even though Warriors based on Assam, they have backstories. They'll go back and forth with other characters of the episodes or of the show.
Hmm.
Bill O'Hara is a police officer who was just assigned to the Chinatown district, which he doesn't want to because, like everybody else in San Francisco who are not Chinese, hate the Chinese.
Hmm.
So, and also another character of Lee, Richard Henry Lee, who was played by Tom Weston Jones, who I felt that was a really good balance of the character that he played,
Yeah.
because he is not more of what everybody else is in San Francisco who doesn't like Asians, but he's more of actual true police officer who doesn't see any type of color lines, who doesn't see if you're Chinese or an Irishman. And in fact, that Lee, the character, is not even from San Francisco. I
Yeah.
believe he's
He's
from the
Southern
South,
boy.
Southern
Hmm.
boy. He's worked with Bill O'Hara in the San Francisco Chinatown
Yeah.
district, and the contrast between Bill and Lee is not more of like a buddy cop type thing. It's more of a yin and yang, which I really thought I saw. I don't know about you,
Hmm.
but I see where
No, I
Bill,
did. I did.
yeah, where Bill is always, because racism is always going to be bad. It's always going to be
Hmm.
bad. I mean, where Bill is always, putting down than the Chinese, like the everybody else who thinks in San Francisco who's not Chinese. But then he's also a cop that, you know, who just wants to just do his job, but to the point where like, listen, let me work my shift and be out. He does actually doesn't care about being a police officer. All
Hmm.
right, because he's more into gambling, and that's what they showed in the episodes plural, that he's an excessive gambling person, or he's very excessive of gambling, wasting
Hmm.
money, and that's why he helped, or that's why he called upon Leary to help him with the person who is trying to collect money from him. So,
I think
but
what's really interesting about the Lee O'Hara dichotomy is sort of how you're saying about the yin yang,
yep,
is that like Lee as a character is very much the pragmatic, conscientious Boy Scout.
yeah,
And then you have O'Hara, who's this sort of weathered father of, I think, five kids, trying to like keep everything together. And it's funny because he was wrongfully assigned the Chinatown beat. Like
yes,
he wanted to get out, like his goal is to get out, but then he's always drawn back in.
right,
And it's interesting to see how like you have this character who's from the sort of Confederate South who um, has thoughts outside of that, and how the O'Hara character imposes the Confederate South ideology onto Lee, and it takes this kind of like journey where they both start to see each other as human beings and
yep,
understanding that human beings are flawed.
yep,
Um, and that like O'Hara is really doing what he's doing to make sure that his family is okay.
Yeah.
And like he has those views that are like questionable, but then at the same time, he always pulls through to make sure that people are okay. In particular, um, with when it comes to Lee Young and Assam in the in that pit,
Yes.
where he recognizes like, okay, Assam, who we know and recognizes as like a kind of friend, um, is in danger and in need of help.
Yeah.
And it's just like you see that character growth, and I think it's phenomenal. I think the writing on the show is just great.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with Lee. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it looks like he's the only one doing police work, actual police work. When anything happens, he's always analyzing. And there are a couple episodes where there's dead bodies on the floor, and he's analyzing the dead bodies. And there was asking, "What are you doing?" It's like I'm doing police work, and it's kind of interesting too because it seems like all the police officers in that show just there, just like I'm just doing my shift. I don't care really what happens. I'm just here from wherever the beginning of my shift to the end of my shift, and that's it. And it seems like
Yeah.
Lee is the only one doing actual police work. He's actually looking, especially when the attempted assassination of Father June. He's actually looking at the map. Like, okay, this is where the Hop Wei is, and this is where the
Mm-hmm.
Long Z is. But whoever set off uh, that explosive to kill or attempted to kill Father June ran this way, and that's towards the Feng Hai. And then Bill is like, these are just Chinese people. Chinese people just run away, or all this other stuff. And it's just like
Mm-hmm.
you kind of like, damn, Bill, listen to
Yeah,
listen
yeah,
to
yeah,
Lee, man. He knows what he's talking about.
yeah.
He's like the commanding officer there, and then Lee is like, okay, well, with Lee's character, he tries to make sure that Bill is aware of what's going on with the police investigation and aware of what he's actually really doing.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about Bill and Lee's, the way that they interact with each other, they're more becoming like brothers. Especially with Lee, he's trying to when he sees Bill take money from a toy, or when he sees Bill doing all this other stuff, a meeting with Larry. Lee's more concerned of I don't want Bill to get in trouble, so I'm trying to see if I could get him out of that trouble, or just remind him, listen, this is wrong. Lee's more of Bill's conscience, other than Bill O'Hara's partner of being a
Mm-hmm.
police officer. I felt
Yeah.
that dynamic of each other, a yin and yang, even though it's more yang, whichever. But I felt that their interaction with each other was really interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about the tongs, Hop Wei,
Yeah.
and the Long Z. I don't know if anybody knows, in the Long Z himself is played by Henry Yuck. Now, I don't know if anybody knows that Henry Yuck was in The Last Dragon. I don't know if anybody who's seen The Last Dragon, but Last Dragon was a martial arts movie in the 80s, played by Tai Mok. Uh, Tai Mok, very quickly, is a martial artist, and he plays a character called Bruce Leroy Green. Or actually, it's Leroy Green, because his nickname was Bruce Leroy. There we go. I got that down. Right. So in The Last Dragon, there were three Chinese characters who was in charge of Fortune Cookie Company, right? So Bruce Leroy walks down trying to find the master, and Bruce Leroy felt that the master was in this Fortune Cookie factory. So he asked the three Chinese characters, and one of them was Henry Yuck, and they played not Chinese character, more of a stereotypical hip hop slang, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you would never think that the way that they were talking, they were Chinese. But that's a little quick trivia there for you guys. So in the Long Z, played by Henry Yuck, he apparently is one but a Tong boss, right? And in the Hop Wei, Father June, who is played by Perry Young, also another Tong boss, and they're not actually in war with each other, They're more of, hey, listen, you stay on your side, I stay on my side, you distribute whatever you want, I distribute this particular thing, and we just keep it that way. However,
Hmm.
unfortunately, things like that never is going to be at peace because of the fact that there is Long Zi's female company, Mai Ling, who was played by Diane Doan. If I'm saying that right. And within the series, Mai Ling is actually Assam's sister, is the reason why Assam came to America to look for. In the beginning, Assam finds out that Mai Ling is the female companion for Long Zi and tries to persuade her to go back to China. And Mai Ling, unfortunately, says no. So,
I think the storyline was that Assam had um, disrespected this warlord, and in order to save Assam from being killed, Mai Ling,
had to
formerly known
marry.
as Zhao Jing, married him.
Oh, you know
Yeah.
what? He was actually explaining this to Penny. So the story is with Mai Ling. Assam actually fought the warlord's son, and the warlord's son got killed, and it was by accident
Mhm.
because Assam actually punched him, and he said he didn't punch him that hard, fell back, hit his head, never came back up, and he died. And unfortunately, he found out that son was a son of a warlord. The warlord was going to kill him. And in exchange for the warlord not killing him, that he would have to marry Assam's sister in order for him to not to get killed. And Assam's sister, Mei Ling, regretted that every day until she escaped to America. So Mai Ling was actually a conspirator of going against the peace between the Hop Wei and the Long Z because of the fact that she knew that Long Z was to the point where he wanted to not be a Tong boss anymore. And
Mhm.
Mai Ling felt like, you know what, I'm going to take over. She took Long Z out, and now she is the boss of the Long Z. So, with that in turn, with any type of drug trade, I believe opium was involved. Uh,
Mhm.
they apparently had to talk to the Hop Wei to see who can control some sort of trade. And one of my favorite episodes was that the Hop Wei agreed to have some sort of tournament to see who would be in charge of that trade. And that would be episode 9, Chinese boxing. And our favorite character, Li Young,
Mhm.
was going to go against Assam from the Hop Wei. The reason why is that my favorite episode because that that whole episode is just martial arts action, right?
Mhm.
They were into the pit, right? This is one great martial arts fighting choreography that I've seen in a very long time, especially when I see Joe Taslim getting in it. Then I'm always thinking that, damn, Andrew Koji, he's kind of tall. You know what I mean? I don't know if you noticed
Mhm.
that. And it's just
Yeah.
like all the time that he fights, he kind of lowers himself down, and then I'm like, maybe it's a camera angle that I'm looking at, but like it seemed like Andrew Koji is a pretty tall dude, but
Yeah.
again, great fighting sequences. You would think that that he was going to win, but then obviously he did not. Mei Ling wanted Li Yong to kill Assam, and it didn't happen until I believe Lee and Bill O'Hara saw what was going on and stopped the whole thing.
Mhm.
So they left Assam bleeding, broken, and Atoy, who's in charge of the whorehouse there, took him in and brought him back to health,
Mhm.
right? Which they had a good sequence in the next episode of Assam's childhood and how he became a martial arts prodigy. I believe James Liu was the actor who played Assam's martial arts Sifu, and Sifu means teacher in Chinese. And I felt that with that sequence of going back into Assam past was actually really good because we don't really know who Assam really is, especially with his past. And in this sequence is where he learns martial arts. It was because of my link that Assam got to do martial arts because she sought out the Sifu, and the Sifu came to Assam, and then the teacher taught Assam. So in a way, it was Mai Ling's idea to have Assam to learn martial arts because apparently Assam was getting beat up
Yep.
in his hometown. So
Sounds very much like somebody named Bruce Lee,
yeah.
who was
Now,
getting
you know what?
into a lot
That's
of
actually
fights.
a good thing that you brought that up, Brandon, because you and I discussed this, that we see a lot of Bruce Lee in these series, in
Hmm.
these episodes.
Yeah.
Apparently, also like characters Bolo, right, played by Richard Ting. Bolo
Hmm.
is actually a name from a character of Enter the Dragon, right? And Mai
Yep.
Ling. Mai Ling is the name of a character in Enter the Dragon.
And O'Hara.
And O'Hara. See, all and I'm actually glad because the essence of Bruce is seen throughout all these characters, right? And then and I also discussed this with you too before in the first episode, Assam, when he's getting picked on by the three immigration officers and he had to fight them. Assam had to do the famous Bruce Lee pose, which I thought was unnecessary, but I get it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
Hmm.
want people to recognize this is a Bruce Lee story.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think what's really good is that like they 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 walked a fine line, right? It's like Andrew Koji is not impersonating Bruce Lee. He's paying
right,
forward a spiritual homage
right,
to Bruce Lee, which is why like the symbolic pose feels a little off kilter because we already know that like
right,
spiritually it's the essence of Bruce Lee. And if we want to talk about writing, we could talk about the cold open of that first episode, where in its depiction is literally the path that Bruce Lee was walking, about somebody coming to America who sees that his people are being disgraced,
right.
um, and like treated like animals, who then stands up for himself and finds himself in a position where he knows that the ongoing battle forward is going to be a struggle. Same thing. It's the same thing with Bruce coming and trying to make his name within Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, like when the one guy falls on the floor and he drops his food and Sam is like, "What are you doing?
Right.
Like, don't eat that." And then that's when he like starts to realize, okay, my people aren't treated like people; they're treated like bodies.
Yep.
Um, and like that selling point for me was where I was like, okay, outside of Shannon Lee, they understand Bruce, and they understand what Bruce was trying to do. So seeing Andrew Koji give this sort of spiritual homage and embodiment to Bruce Lee
Right.
feels super respectful. Also, like the character of Assam is very much the everyman character that we can all fit into, and
Yeah.
like because he speaks fact. He's not he's
Yeah.
not there to like play games. He's speaking fact, and I think what's really cool about that is just like he has the cocky sort of confidence that's also very humble at times that we as people wish we had. So it's like when he does bring on that spirit of Bruce,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, cool. I'm gonna sit back and
Yeah.
like partake because he's been going through a lot.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
with the stance, it's just for me, I couldn't get behind it, but like I was discussing
Yeah.
before, it's just he kind of actually got away from it towards the
Hmm.
end of the season, of the first season, because I felt like, okay, like I said before, you're paying homage to Bruce. I get it,
Hmm.
and I felt like doing the stance. It's just like it wasn't. I felt like they were trying to uh, forcefully make you say, "Hey, this is a Bruce Lee episode," or "No, this is a Bruce Lee type of character." But
Hmm.
even if you're gonna do that, you didn't really have to put the pose.
Yeah.
The way that Andrew Koji portrayed himself is actually a different type of character of who Bruce is, right?
Hmm.
But obviously, Assam and Bruce, they're not the same people.
They're not,
So
not at all.
I'm trying to understand why they had to put that there, but understand in your position where, hey, this is something that you have to recognize. This is something that even though you don't know who Bruce Lee is, this is where you're going to find it, because Bruce Lee created this universe in order for us to watch it. I understand that. Especially my other favorite episode, episode 10 is the last episode of the season, and it's called If You're Going to Bow, Bow Low, is where he had the warehouse fight with Leary. Holy shit. Now, in contrast with the fight he had with Lee Young and the fight he had with Leary are two different things, which I always try to tell people that I always saw that tournament was more like a UFC fight. But even though they're trying to kill each other, right? But then the fight in the warehouse is more of a street fight where he's using everything. He pushed this dude in front of a iron beam, and he's using all this chains and stuff like that. That's like more of a survival type of thing, because that, you know, the Chinese workers were being attacked by the Irishmen, and Sahm had to step in and say, this is wrong. And then especially when Leary comes in, they had that split second of a fight. And then Leary respected Sahm because of the fact that, okay, I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you later because the police came. I'm going to see you later. And you know that tension, like he respected that his Sam's martial arts ability. The fact that, okay, this is no quote unquote coolie that, you know, I can just, you know, wipe away. Like this, I got to work hard for this, because if I see him again, I'm going to kill him. That's what I saw. I'm like, oh man, I loved how they ended this episode. How about this? Tell me your favorite episode.
My favorite episode would have to be episode 5, titled "The Blood in the Shit." And it's the one where they're trapped in a saloon with a body full of I think it's gold that Father June had young June and Sahm pick up, and there's an outlaw who comes into the saloon trying to steal that gold, and it's kind of like Sahm, young June, the owners of the saloon, a couple other characters, and like
two
a couple
passengers and the priest. Yeah.
And it's just like, if we're gonna die, we're gonna die here doing this thing. We're gonna fight. And it's like, for me, that was my favorite episode because it just, first of all, felt like its own complete thing. Like, outside of the series itself, if you were to throw me in there, it's like I'm already there. I'm like super with it. But just the episode itself, in terms of the Western sort of iconography of it, the way it opens with Sahm and young June in the carriage listening to these people like talk about them, and like Sahm is like, I understand everything that's happening.
Yeah, that's
just like this sort of.
That's the time when young June said, "You know how to speak duck?" And then it's just like, I'll explain that later. Yeah.
It's just like, that's the one moment where he like unveils that he can speak English fluently, and just that episode in general just felt super on point, right? You have like I said, the Western iconography, you have the martial arts with it, you have also the hip hop score that comes with it, that's sort of tied throughout Warrior in general.
But like, especially the end credits.
So that whole episode felt so contained, and very much reminds me of like, man, I wish this was a whole movie that I could watch on the screen, because it's just so good.
The way that especially at towards the end of that episode, when the outlaw comes back and he has his friends with him, and then Sahm is by himself, and then like, something's up. And then he told the outlaw, I just want to negotiate. And that was like, there's no negotiation here. It's like, I'm just paraphrasing. It's like, like, I just, my negotiation is, I'm going to take your horses and we're going to get out of here. And the outlaw's like, no, you're not. It's like, oh, because, it's like, I'm giving you an opportunity for me not to kill you. And they're laughing. And then the only thing that I'm really disappointed is just the fact that Sahm killed the outlaw first. He ripped his throat out, and then he just went after his boys. I'm like, man, if he just left him for the last fight, then that would have been epic. But I guess, you know what? Go for the biggest dude, knock him out, and then the rest should be easy to do, which was because you had the shootouts, right? And then you had at the end you had the priest shooting that one last dude, and then you had young June going over the place with the knives, and you know he's trying to grab the gun and all this other stuff, which it was actually, you know, really good, really great episode. And I don't know if you know this, at the end of that episode, before they rode off, not into the sunset, but you know, rode off to go to the next town, to go back to San Francisco, they put like cowboys hats on, right? I don't know if you noticed that that type of hat that Assam was wearing was kind of like the hat that Kwai Chang Caine was wearing in Kung Fu. So you kind of have to like think, I'm like, I get it. That
which is like
what could have been, you know?
It's cool because I, you know, when that moment did happen, I did smile to myself because I was just like, now it feels like the wish was fulfilled, like the pursuit was fulfilled, and it brought me back to like, you know, what could have been if Bruce Lee was in a Western film? Like how cool would that have been? And like just seeing them right off, I was just like, this whole episode is 100% the hero's journey. And it reminded me of like obviously The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Zorro, even like all these other things. It's just a fantastic episode, hands down.
When we discussed about before seeing Bruce's essence in these episodes, we forgot to mention the interaction between Penny Blake and Assam. Penny Blake is played by
Joanna Vanderham.
Joanna, right? And if anybody knows the history of Bruce married an American girl who's Caucasian, Linda Lee, and now Linda Lee Cadwell. So they had that interesting relationship as a white Caucasian woman, Penny Blake, interacting with Assam, Chinese. And in the beginning of the episodes, they first talk, and then, you know, they get together, all this other stuff, and then, you know, they stop being with each other. However, that dynamic of the way they interacted is an homage to Bruce and Linda, which I thought was really interesting. But everybody also forgets to mention the interaction between Assam and O'Hara or Bill, because originally in Bruce's writings that Assam and Bill were supposed to be like not best friends, but more of how Lee and Bill are supposed to be. So I never read anything about Lee's character, but I believe Lee was probably most likely written by other writers to add in for Bill's interaction with. But originally it was supposed to be Assam and Bill, more of that having a relationship where, probably more of a medium of getting into where the non-Chinese area is, and then having inside scoop of the tongs, and I felt that would have been a great interaction.
It really would have been, just thinking about Bruce Lee in general, it really would have been the Green Hornet, the Kato sort of stepping stone that Bruce was really looking for. I mean, he was really looking for equality with Kato's character, because I mean, I feel like everybody says this, but like when they watched the Green Hornet, they watched the Green Hornet for Bruce playing Kato.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I think that dynamic, if it were to be fully realized in that sense with the Sahm and O'Hara, would have been great. And I think it definitely would have tied into what Bruce was trying to achieve, is that like sense of equality and partnership.
Now, for you being in the film industry, the cinematography, the acting, the characters, your thoughts on that? Like how do you feel that this was portrayed cinematic wise?
So I think off the jump a little bit. Like with the first episode, I recognized the choices with camera. And they did this really interesting thing where it's like, if you want to be in the perspective of the character's mind a little bit, they shot it in a certain way. I'm not sure if it was the shutter speed or just in general, like the lens that they used, but they shot it in a way that was so distinct from the way the rest of the show was shot. Where it's like, if you were in a Sam's head, you can tell that there was a very particular moment where the director was like, or the showrunner was like, okay, we're going to make sure this stands out. And I don't know how to describe the camera movement with that one, but when you watch the show, you'll start to pick up on the things where it's just like, okay, they're making a choice with this camera. And like overall, I think like the beautiful sweeping shots and like the tracking shots and all this other stuff really set up the world. What I did like was that they didn't focus solely on close-ups with the martial arts scenes. Because they, you know, Hollywood has a tendency to sort of just like cut, and then like be really close because they're assuming that the audience will just pick up on the action. Taken 3, not throwing any judgment, but I think when you start to look at like wuxia cinema and like how wide the shots are, because the performing artists they know what they're doing, and it's just like you have to trust it. So when you see Andrew Koji or Joe Taslim or even the Young June character sort of like doing their thing, they let us stay with it, and they hold out on certain moments a little bit longer because they want you to feel that impact. Like when Young June has this whole like bloodthirsty scene with his knives, and you're just like, okay, cool, this is his character and we're seeing this, and like just all that stuff. Like kudos to them for allowing the camera to do its thing. In terms of the performances, I think the performances are fantastic for what it is, you know. Like I think they made smart decisions. I think the smartest decision they've done, which is something I haven't actually seen, which is new to me, was the language shifts that they would do when like Sahm was talking to Young June in their native tongue, and then the camera would switch, and then Sahm would be talking to like O'Hara in English, and it's just like playing with how we see the perspective, and then the choice of subtitles. Like it brings it back to this one quote that I read somewhere, where I think it was an actress, where she was just speaking. She's Latina, and she was talking about how she says, "I wish people could see how intelligent I was when I'm speaking my native tongue." And then you take that perspective and you bring it to Warrior, and you're like, okay, so the people who speak English only see their Asian counterparts speaking in this broken language, but then you switch it and you're like, yo, there's this whole world. And I think it's like the way they rotated around characters to sort of build that universe was beautifully done, for sure. Because you know, people in America tend to be lazy and they don't want to read subtitles, and you miss all this great content and art because you just don't want to read. And I think it was a really smart balance, for sure.
What I thought also that's interesting with what you said is just that with Andrew Koji or Assam, they didn't really have to switch all the time that he was speaking. There were times when he did speak in Cantonese. There was times, but then not so much. But then it's just like he could speak English on both sides of the spectrum, right? For me, unfortunately, I'm not one of the lazy people in America. I do like to read subtitles. Even if it's in English, I just put the subtitles on and read it. Any particular character besides Joe Taslim you thought that was a pretty good character to follow?
I would say, so I definitely had an interest in Young June. And I think it's tied a little bit with my interest in Leary as a character. I think if I really had to choose my interest, I was very much entertained by Young June, but I had so many questions about Leary as a character, just like where it was going to progress, because the way they wrote Leary's character sets him up for something bigger, right?
Yeah.
And it's like we also, just as martial artists, we know that you have Chinese boxing and then you have boxing, and it's just like, okay, well, we've seen Wing Chun versus boxing with Yip Man, whatever, with Tyson and and Donnie, and it's
That was
like,
actually
and
real.
it's
You
like,
know that, right?
yeah, yeah, it's 100%
100% real.
factual, and I think it's always interesting to see the two. It's like when you're playing Tekken and you have Steven the boxer versus
Mhm.
Law,
Yeah.
the Bruce Lee
Yeah,
inspired
the force law,
character.
martial law. Yeah.
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 So like seeing Leary bring on the sort of Irish boxing world, and just like his role and everything was super
Mhm.
interesting because he's 1000% a man of his people.
Oh, yeah.
And so was Assam, but it just took Assam this whole journey past trying to find Mei Ling to recognize, like, if I want to protect my people, I have to be with the Hop Wei.
Mhm.
And it's like, that to me was super interesting. Young Jun as a character is just like overall great to see. So it's like, that's it's a dead giveaway. I feel like everybody likes Young
Yeah.
Jun.
I believe that everybody likes Young Jun because of the fact that his character pops out. You know,
Mhm,
like whenever he says something, especially when he's talking, even in Cantonese and even the American side of it, like it's just like it. He's very explicit, and that's what attracts
yeah,
everybody. That's what attracts everybody to him because sticky, and he's like onion, and all this stuff like that, and it's like, oh, you speak duck, and in the way that he portrays himself, it's actually opposite of Assam because Assam is more laid back, right? He's very direct, he's very simple. Where Young Jun, he's more very emotional,
mhm,
right? He says all these words because he disagrees what Father June is doing. He disagrees of what the Long Z is doing, and he's kind of like he's making himself be as for the character. He's trying to make himself be like, listen, like I know my shit
mhm,
too. Like the, the the way that they're doing it, it's wrong. We should be
mhm,
doing it this way. Even
mhm,
though that his father, you know, Father June makes sense of what he's trying to do with the Hop Wei. Young Jun is like, listen, that's old. We have to do something new. Listen
mhm.
to what I have. Also ideas. Listen to my ideas too. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
obviously, Father June is like, listen, you're my son. You don't know shit. You're just glad that you're in the Hop Wei. You know what I mean? So with
Mhm,
Young Jun, he's trying to prove something to
mhm,
himself. I mean, when we discuss about season two later on our podcast episode, but within this season one, you see Young Jun trying to be is slowly rising to power because
mhm,
after the assassination attempt from Father June, you see temporarily Young Jun step up. It's like
mhm,
listen, and then he's telling the council of what they need to do. And the council's like,
mhm,
oh, Father June won't approve of this. It's more of an emotional response. You shouldn't be doing this. And even Bolo stood up. Assam is like, we have to show these mother effers that they can't be doing this to us. It doesn't
mhm.
matter if it was somebody else. They're the ones who brought this war to us. And
Yeah.
even young June is like, the war already started. They brought it
Mhm.
to us. They started it.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can see young June rise to power at the point where like, okay, my father is temporary, in the dispose. I'm stepping up. When Assam, Bolo, and Young June went to the Funghai territory, all bets are off. That was
Yeah,
one
yeah,
of
yeah.
the craziest fight scenes that I've seen in that episode. And then the funniest thing is when Young June took out the gun and shot one of the Fong Hai after all that fighting. And Assam was like, you had that thing that whole time.
Yeah.
So it's like a bit humor in that episode. But then, uh, for like I said, with one of the characters that I was really invested in was Young Jun, and even
Mhm.
if people don't see it, I was actually invested in Mai Ling because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of
She.
the brother and sister dynamic that
Mhm.
Assam and Mai Ling had. Um, you have to see that also the rise to power of Mai Ling because she obviously was, Long Zi's female companion until she killed him,
Hmm.
right? And now she became the Tong boss. And now, from that rise to power, she's trying to take over everything because of the fact that she doesn't want to be that farm girl that Assam always remembered her as.
I was gonna say that like I think what's really interesting about the Miley and Assam dynamic is like they are siblings and they are in this war, and
Right.
it's kind of funny that like in each sort of step and turn outside of the tongs, they're still trying to protect each other
Yeah.
until it gets to a point where like it becomes personal
Yeah.
between the two. And I think what really tips off the sense that like Myling and Assam are starting to build further strife between each other are there are some moments where you have Joe Taslim's Lee Young and there are cutaways to him where he's starting to question Myling a little bit. And you're like, okay, so he's having some difficulty with like
Yeah.
staying true to Myling because there's some actions that she's taking that are like
Questionable.
a little bit questionable for sure. Like the one where and I knew this was coming just from a writing perspective, but like with the handgun, and I was like, I knew it was coming because it was set up already. But I was and like you see like the Lee Young character like question this because this is not something he knew.
Right.
Like he didn't know this. Like what other things? So it's just like there's just so much going on.
Right.
There's so much going on.
Well, that's why, everything is being set up for season two for the first season.
Hmm.
But people don't also know that season one and season two were filmed back to back. So
Yeah.
it's not like oh, they renewed season two. I'm like, season two was already filmed, right?
Hmm.
But what everybody was actually waiting on, because apparently Warrior was more of a Cinemax original, and then what happened this year? HBO Max acquired the Warrior to
Hmm.
their roster. So now, after that, Warrior season three was approved, since we've been waiting for a long time for season three, because season one for Warrior, great season. Season two, Warrior, woof. I was
Hmm.
like, wow.
Hmm.
And that's why I was like, you know what? Season three has to come. We need season three. And you know what? It's here. So we are at the end of the podcast where we do the last words. And Brandon, since you
Hmm.
are the co-host of this podcast, you have any last words?
I do. I do have some last words. Well, I have two last words. I think the first last word that I'm going to say is in relationship to my own sort of career with Giant Island. Um,
Ah,
it's a film production company and developing studio that promotes stories of inclusivity, focused on narratives that aren't normally seen or typically seen, and range from worlds of drama, fantasy, thriller, kids stories in general. And it's really about promoting um, acceptability, and relationship. Like the idea behind Giant Island is to bring people together and have people share conversations, just like we're doing now, about content that they can relate to or stories that they can see themselves in. So that's Giant Island in a nutshell. um, and then I think my last word is about mental health. Um, I think I think it's important for people to understand that it's important for you as a person, even if you're feeling like nobody's listening, to understand that there are always people listening. Um, that there's no shame in seeking conversation or that comfort of opening up and talking to people. It's really tough to do it on your own. So always push forward and make sure that you find that comfort in yourself to reach out to people.
great. So, Brandon, how can people reach you?
My personal Instagram is my first, middle, and last name, Brandon Hugo Arroyo. And then my film page is Jaya_Island. For Instagram purposes, you can reach me on Instagram. My DMs are always open, and I'm always willing to talk to people about movies, future projects, and anything that really is on their mind.
Great. So, Brandon, how long you been training in Jeet Kune Do for?
So I started in, I believe, 2011, and I went until 2013 with Sifu Richard Torres, our Sifu, and because of college, I had to step away, and I've been training on my own for a while there, and then I just got back into it this past December, January with you. But it kind of feels like I've been training for a very long time, both not physically, but also in the spiritual side of JKD, and like finding that wholeness and that unity and that sense of becoming one in totality. And I would say maybe like 3 years of like full rigorous training, and then the rest of that was kind of just like finding myself and training on my own and educating and just learning from that process.
All right, guys. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. All right?
You think because you speak American, you can talk shit to me?
Well, you have to admit it helps.
This uppity chink needs to learn his place. You think you can take me on?
That's the wrong question.
Oh, yeah? What's the right one?
The right question is, do you really want to find out?